Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a world where bedtime smelled very, very strong. Not because of scented candles, no, but because someone genuinely believed that a handful. Welcome to the wonderfully odd world of Victorian sleep remedies, where you might fall asleep gently or just pass out from the smell. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're lying on a stiff, narrow bed in a middle-class London home. The sheets are tucked in so tightly you could bounce a shilling off them. Around you, thick wallpaper with patterns that look suspiciously like asparagus, lace curtains, and a heavy velvet bedspread that feels like it hasn't been washed since the last Queen's Jubilee. But the first thing that hits you isn't the decor. It's the smell. Lavender. So much lavender. It's in little cloth sachets tied to the bedposts. It's stitched into your nightshirt collar. It's even sprinkled onto your pillow like it's seasoning for sleep. You sneeze, then again. But someone from 1880 insists this is the height of bedtime science. Lavender wasn't just a fashion. It was practically a philosophy. In the 19th century, it was believed to calm the nerves, sweeten the humors, and encourage moral purity. If your sleep was troubled, clearly your spirit needed purifying, and a noseful of purple petals would do just that. You sit up. The room is dimly lit by gaslight, and the flickering shadows make your nightstand look alive. On top of it, a small ceramic pot labeled for restless nights. Inside, more lavender, and some other dried herbs that look a bit like crunchy seaweed. Don't ask. Here's the thing. Victorian households didn't just like lavender, they weaponized it. Lavender-infused pillows, lavender baths, lavender in your tea, lavender potpourri satchels dangling from every doorknob like floral grenades. But there's a historical reason behind this obsession. You see, back in the 1800s, people had a very miasmatic view of disease. They believed that sickness floated around in bad smells, what they called foul airs. If something reeked, it wasn't just unpleasant, it was potentially deadly. So, filling a bedroom with what they considered sweet-smelling herbs was kind of like installing an ancient air purifier. A very fragrant one. Modern science does suggest lavender might have some mild sedative effects. Essential oil diffusers today still rely on it, but whether it could knock you out after a hard day of coal smoke and corsets, well, historians are still arguing about that one. But in Victorian homes, the scent wasn't just for sleep, it was part of a broader effort to tame the body. The bedroom wasn't just a place to rest, it was a moral space. A clean, sweet-smelling sleep was a righteous sleep. If you dreamed of anything improper, well, maybe you hadn't inhaled enough floral goodness. By now, your head sinking back into the pillow, lulled by the gentle wave of aroma, or possibly just overwhelmed by it. There's a faint scratching sound in the corner, probably a mouse. But don't worry, they're used to lavender too. Outside the window, the gas lights flicker like fireflies, casting a faint orange glow across the cobbled street. A horse clops by. You imagine your neighbors are also winding down, surrounded by their own small clouds of floral perfume and herbal mystery. You close your eyes. The lavender is winning slowly. It's the middle of the night, and you wake up with a tickle in your nose. Again, it's that darn lavender sachet tied too close to your face. You push it gently to the side, only to be met with something else. What is that smell? You sit up and sniff the air like some kind of 19th century hunting dog. Not lavender this time, something sharper, almost oniony. Yep, it's an actual raw onion, sitting in a bowl on the nightstand. You rub your eyes and wonder if this is a dream. But no, it's not. It's just Victorian sleep science being its very Victorian self again. You lean in closer. The onion is peeled, cut in half, and its layers are glistening slightly under the flicker of the gaslight. A faint tang fills the room. It's not unpleasant exactly, but it's also not what you'd expect to smell when drifting off into dreamland. So why, exactly, did Victorians keep onions by the bed? Well, onions were thought to draw out bad air. Much like lavender pushed away evil humors, onions were supposed to absorb them. It's kind of like the ancient version of putting baking soda in your fridge, but with more dramatic flair and the hope that it would fix your insomnia. Some medical pamphlets from the 1800s even advised placing chopped onions under the bed or rubbing onion juice on your temples to help you relax. To be clear, do not try this at home unless you really want to smell like a Victorian stew. At the time, there were widespread beliefs that vegetables, especially those that made your eyes water, could also clear your internal obstructions. It's unclear what exactly that means, but it was used to justify nearly every odd remedy from beetroot poultices to horseradish foot rubs. Onions had a starring role in this culinary pharmacy. You'd eat them raw to heat the blood, boil them into a nightcap for digestive clarity, or simply leave them in the room to catch evil vapors like a brave little root vegetable sentry. Historians still debate whether Victorians genuinely believed in onion magic or whether it was more of a folk tradition carried on through generations. There's little scientific evidence that onions improve sleep, though they do make a great excuse not to cuddle. Of course, this wasn't just a British quirk. In parts of Eastern Europe, onion sleep remedies were even more elaborate, stuffed in pillows, sewn into mattress seams, and mashed into warming pastes for the soles of your feet. Global folk medicine took the onion theory and ran with it. Back in your Victorian bedroom, you lie back down, eyes slightly watering, and wonder how anyone got any sleep with all these smells wafting around. The combination of lavender and onion is surprisingly, weirdly soothing. Or maybe your nose is just giving up. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's cat yowls. You hear it even through the heavy brick walls and sash windows. But you don't mind. Your body is warm under the covers, your mind gently floating somewhere between reason and herbal confusion. You close your eyes again. The onion glows faintly under the light, your strange little sleep companion. Not quite a teddy bear, but oddly comforting. And so you drift off, not into a scentless slumber, but into something much more peculiar. Lavender and onion. The yin and yang of Victorian midnight logic. You wake up the next morning, sunlight squeezing its way past the heavy curtains, and there it is again, the faint, lingering aroma of herbs, roots, and something that might be camphor. You stretch, yawn, and catch a glimpse of the cluttered little nightstand beside your bed. Lavender sachet, onion bowl, and a tiny blue bottle. You pick it up. The label, printed in an ornate, slightly faded script, reads, Doctor. Tibbles, soothing slumber, salts for nervous constitutions. You uncork the bottle. A puff of scented powder escapes, camphor, mint, and just a hint of something vaguely medicinal like a pharmacy and a garden, got into a polite Victorian argument and agreed to disagree. You give it a tiny sniff and almost sneeze. Strong stuff. Back in the 19th century, the Victorian bedroom was a battlefield. The enemy? Insomnia. And doctors, both real and extremely not real, were more than happy to sell you all kinds of sleep remedies to fight it. Herbal powders were among the most popular. Some were gentle, like valerian root, hops, or chamomile. Others, less so. Ever heard of lettuce opium? Yeah, it was a thing. Victorians would boil large quantities of lettuce down to a syrup and sip it before bed. It was said to have a calming effect on the nerves. Science is still out on how effective it was, but hey, at least it was salad adjacent. Then there were the salts and tinctures. Victorian apothecaries were basically sleep potion vending machines. You could buy calming drops made with everything from orange blossom to belladonna. Yes, that belladonna, the potentially deadly one. One popular recipe even included chloroform, which, just to clarify, you should never use recreationally. But for Victorians, if it knocked you out, it was fair game. The labels were always comforting. Gentle on the organs. Soothes delicate nerves. Or the ever-reassuring, recommended by 4 out of 5 country vicars. Totally made up, but it sounded trustworthy. You start to wonder, did these actually work, or did people just believe they would? Historians are still unsure. Some ingredients, like valerian and hops, are now known to have mild sedative properties. Others, like camphor, were more about creating a sensory experience, something sharp, soothing, and ritualistic that told your brain, it's bedtime now. Let's put the existential dread away for the night. As you rummage through the contents of your imaginary Victorian washstand drawer, you find a dried bouquet of herbs tied with twine. Lavender, of course, but also rosemary, mugwort, and thyme, all of them, once considered powerful allies against nightmares and sleeplessness. And then there's something crunchy, a tiny linen pouch of toasted hops. Yes, that's a real thing, too. People would heat them up, stuff them into little pillows, and fall asleep with their heads nestled into the warm, bitter-smelling compress. Supposedly relaxing. Also kind of like sleeping in a homebrew supply closet. The line between herbal help and actual medicine was often blurry in the Victorian age. A lot of it came down to how desperate you were for rest. And let's be honest, when you're tossing and turning at 3 a.m., the idea of sniffing some salty mint camphor powder doesn't sound that weird. You put the tiny bottle back. The scent still clings to your fingers. Cool, minty, slightly sweet. Maybe, just maybe, it helped someone drift off to sleep a century ago. Or maybe it was all part of the ritual. The bedtime theater. The quiet illusion that you were in control of your own sleep. You lie back down. Through the thick Victorian silence, a clock ticks loudly on the wall. Your fingers still smell faintly of camphor, and as the morning haze starts to slip away, you think, sleep never really changes, does it? You pull your shawl tighter as you step into the dim hallway, past peeling wallpaper and flickering gas lamps. You're on a quiet mission now, not for adventure, not even for tea. No, you're after something far more elusive, the perfect bedtime beverage. And in the Victorian world, that meant possets. A posset, in case you've never had the pleasure, or confusion, was the comfort drink of choice for sleepy Brits. Imagine hot milk curdled with ale or wine, thickened with eggs or bread, and sometimes laced with spices, sugar, or even a spoonful of brandy if Aunt Mildred wasn't watching. Sounds odd? You're not wrong, but apparently it was cozy enough to drift off with. You enter the Victorian kitchen, stone floor cold under your feet, copper kettles hanging like sleepy soldiers on a rack. A posset pot sits by the hearth. It's a strange little jug with a wide belly and a spout, kind of like a teapot that's been working overtime at the bakery. You lift the lid. Inside, thick, creamy remnants of last night's sleep potion. Milk was the base of most bedtime drinks in the 1800s. Warm, rich, and believed to soothe both stomach and soul. But the Victorians didn't stop there. Oh no. They threw in nutmeg, cloves, a splash of sack, an old-school white wine, and sometimes even breadcrumbs for texture. Because why not combine sleep with a light supper? You find the tin of nutmeg. It's already half empty. Clearly popular. Victorians believed nutmeg warmed the blood, calmed the nerves, and in large enough doses might just cause mild hallucinations. Perfect for bedtime, right? Note, please don't try this at home. Beside it sits a tiny jar labeled poppy syrup. Not a nickname. Real poppies, boiled down with sugar and water into a sticky sweet concoction used to knock out children, adults, and presumably anyone who asked too many questions. Here's where things get controversial. Some historians argue these soothing nighttime brews were just cozy customs. Others point out the casual presence of narcotic ingredients and raise an eyebrow. Was it really about the warmth of the milk or the mild sedative floating inside it? The jury's still out. You carefully spoon some treacle into a new pot and sprinkle in the spices. The scent rises immediately, sweet, spicy, like Christmas after a long nap. You stir slowly, watching the surface ripple with golden light. The whole thing feels ritualistic, like your grandmother's recipe book had a potion section tucked in the back. Other popular drinks included hot water with lemon and honey, warm ale with cinnamon, or the occasional mug of beef tea. Yes, beef. Broth was thought to be grounding, strengthening, and easier to digest than a chunk of roast. Nothing like falling asleep with the taste of cow on your tongue. You take a careful sip from the ladle. The posset is thick, velvety, with just enough sweetness to trick your brain into releasing a few of those all-is-well chemicals. It tastes like warmth wrapped in nostalgia, or like someone blended a pie into a blanket. But your favorite? The milk punch, a Victorian classic made from milk, sugar, nutmeg, and, if the kids were already in bed, a generous pour of brandy. Often served warm and sipped slowly by the fire, it was the kind of drink that didn't just make you sleepy, it wanted you horizontal. The fire pops softly as you pour the drink into a mismatched teacup. You curl up in a corner chair, mug in hand, the scent of cloves dancing around your nose. Somewhere upstairs, a wind-up clock ticks in rhythm with your breath. And for just a moment, you understand why the Victorians put so much effort into these little bedtime concoctions. It wasn't just about sleep. It was about making peace with the night, about slowing down, warming up, and drinking something that said, hey, the world can wait until morning. The window creaks slightly in the breeze, and you glance toward the frost-kissed glass panes. Outside, the world is silent. But inside this Victorian house, you've just discovered a rather pungent companion in the quest for a good night's sleep, the humble onion. Yes, onion. Not sautéed, not in a stew, but sitting raw, sliced, and unapologetically stinky beside the bed. Welcome to the more eccentric side of Victorian bedtime remedies. While lavender and possets got all the soft, dreamy PR, the onion sat quietly in the background, doing its work with zero fanfare, and all the smell. You duck into the tiny guest room, where a porcelain bowl sits by the bed. Inside it, half an onion. It looks lonely and mildly threatening. But this wasn't some culinary accident. In the 1800s, people genuinely believed that onions could absorb bad air and balance the humors in the body, especially at night. The theory was simple. If something inside you was unsettled, your bile, your mood, your soul, then placing a sliced onion nearby would suck the chaos right out of you, like a sponge, for melancholy, with breath-freshening consequences no one ever discussed. You bend down and give it a sniff. Yep, still an onion. Still powerful. The idea wasn't limited to England, by the way. Across Europe and even parts of Asia, onions were seen as nature's air purifiers and mood adjusters. Think of them as a kind of pre-industrial air diffuser, if your diffuser came with a strong chance of tears. Of course, not everyone bought into the onion magic. Even in the Victorian period, some doctors rolled their eyes, probably while secretly stashing a bulb under their own pillows, just in case. And today, historians are still divided. Was it an old wives' tale, or was there something to the belief that onions could draw out sickness from the air? There's at least one interesting clue. Onions do release sulfur compounds, and in a tightly sealed room, that might irritate the eyes and nose just enough to keep things flowing, which, in the medical logic of the time, meant your body was expelling the bad stuff. Very productive sneezing. You look around the room and notice another curious item, a pair of socks soaked in vinegar. Not yours, thankfully. In the same family of nighttime cures, vinegar was thought to cool the blood and calm an anxious mind. Combined with the onion next to your head and the vinegar on your feet, you basically became a human salad while you slept. Some households even went so far as to rub onions directly onto the soles of the feet, believing it would draw out toxins through the skin. The science? Dubious. The scent? Unforgettable. Then there's the whole bit about miasma theory. In the 1800s, people still believed that many illnesses, especially those that struck at night, came from bad smells in the air. Not germs, not viruses, just bad vibes, carried by stinky breezes. The onion, in this view, wasn't just medicine. It was protection, like a small, tear-inducing bouncer keeping disease at bay. And if the onion didn't work, well, there was always camphor, or rubbing goose grease on your chest, or singing a lullaby to your feet. Sleep hygiene, Victorian style. You sit on the edge of the bed, the scent of raw onion curling around you like a judgmental cat. You can't help but admire the stubborn practicality of it. It's not glamorous. It's not poetic. But it's real, tangible. It sits there and says, "Hey, I might not smell like lavender, but I'm trying, okay?" Some historians today find it charming. Others find it baffling. But either way, they agree. The Victorian nightstand was a battlefield, a place where science, superstition, and household produce all fought side by side to get you to sleep. You lie down slowly, eyes adjusting to the soft lamp glow, onion bowl at your bedside like a particularly judgmental roommate, and maybe, just maybe, you feel a little more grounded, a little more seasoned. You wake up, sort of. It's not morning yet, but the candles burn down halfway, and the fire's embers are just glowing orange in the grate. In the stillness, you shift under the weight of your many blankets. Your face is warm, your toes are cold. Of course they are, because it's the Victorian era, and central heating is still decades away. Even upper-class homes struggle to keep bedrooms warm through the night, and so began the curious art of thermal improvisation, a whole category of sleep hacks built around one goal: not freezing to death. Let's talk about hot water bottles, but not the squishy rubber ones you're used to. No, the 19th century version was a stoneware jug filled with boiling water, wrapped in a cloth, and slipped under the covers like a small, warm ghost. If you were wealthy, it might even be made of copper, elegantly polished, and known as a bed warmer. You'd preheat the mattress before crawling in, because that 2-minute burst of warmth was all the luxury you were getting. But if you were less fortunate, you made do. Sometimes it was a brick, heated in the hearth and wrapped in rags. Sometimes it was a baked potato, doing double duty as both bed warmer and midnight snack. One desperate Victorian journal entry describes someone using their family cat. Warm and unwilling, the writer noted. You lift the edge of your blanket now, imagining the scalding weight of a water jug tucked near your feet. It's hard to say if it helped you sleep or just scared you into holding perfectly still so you didn't kick it over and burn your legs. Now, let's say you were really having trouble sleeping. You'd tried the warm posset, sniffed the lavender sachet, and yes, even given the onion a chance. But nothing worked. That's when you'd turn to bedroom rituals. One of the most common, airing the sheets before bed. Victorians believed stale bed linens caused restless dreams. So, each evening, many households would shake the blankets out the window and leave them hanging for a while, even in the dead of winter. You can almost feel your frozen fingers wrestling with a stubborn quilt as sleet comes down sideways. Ah, sleep hygiene. And then there's the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Every respectable bedroom had one. But here's the twist. Victorians were obsessed with sleep rhythms. Not just how long you slept, but when you slept and what sounds surrounded you. Some folks believed the ticking helped them fall asleep. Others found it drove them mad. There are actual letters from the period detailing how people disassembled their clocks nightly just to get some peace. Which brings us to one of the strangest habits, noisy rooms. Believe it or not, some Victorians deliberately sought noise to sleep by. Creaking floorboards, distant carriage wheels, servants cleaning the kitchen. Silence, they thought, could be unnatural and even dangerous. Quiet rooms were the domain of deathbeds. You hear it now. The faint drip of a leaky pipe, the hush of wind against the shutter. It's oddly comforting, because, like them, you're not just trying to fall asleep, you're performing a nightly ritual of survival and comfort and habit. One that connects you to generations of people who tried everything they could to beat insomnia before Ambien existed. And just when you're about to drift off, bam, cold feet again. Which means it's time to talk about bed socks. Wool, flannel, even rabbit fur if you were fancy. Sleeping in socks wasn't optional, it was vital. Some even soaked them in herbal vinegar first, believing the tingly sensation distracted the body from thoughts, or possibly from the existential dread of 19th century life. Today, sleep scientists would call that a distraction stimulus. Back then, it was just what your grandmother told you to do. As always, historians disagree about the actual effectiveness of these rituals. Was it placebo? Was it communal wisdom passed down in layers of wool and steam? Probably both. But one thing is clear. Victorians didn't just go to bed. They went into battle against the cold, against bad smells, against their own swirling thoughts. And they brought hot bricks, onion bowls, and boiled milk with them. So now, as you nestle back under your imagined horsehair mattress, try to appreciate the strange beauty of it all. Some people meditate, some count sheep, but the Victorians, they wore flannel nightcaps, aired the bed sheets, and trusted in the warm silence of ticking clocks and toasty bricks. And somehow they slept. The wind outside shifts. You imagine it rattling the shutters just slightly. Inside, the candlelight flickers lower, and the room smells faintly of chamomile. Or maybe it's just your imagination, layered over centuries of bedtime rituals. Tonight, you're staying at your cousin's country house. It's 1874. The ceilings are high, the mattress is stuffed with horsehair, and someone just brought you something peculiar, a dream diary. Victorians, as it turns out, took dreaming seriously, not in the modern, oh, that was weird kind of way. More in the, this might be a message from beyond, best to document it way, especially if you were a woman. You flip open the small, leather-bound notebook and find delicate script. Dreamt of violets. Mother ill. Must consult Dr. R. It's not poetry. It's data. See, people believed dreams were coded insights into your health, your future, even your digestion. A heavy dinner? Expect troubled dreams? Too much cheese? Nightmares? No, seriously. Cheese got a lot of blame. If you were middle or upper class, you might even consult one of the many dream interpretation books that flooded the market in the 19th century. Titles like The Royal Dream Book or Madame Le Marchand's Fortune-Telling Secrets offered explanations for everything from dreaming of a white horse, good omen, to dreaming of a flooded cellar, emotional turmoil, or maybe just leaky pipes. And if you were a bit more spiritual? Well, now we're getting into sleep seances. Yes? Seances. The Victorian fascination with the afterlife didn't end when the candles were snuffed. Some believed dreams were a doorway to the spirit world, a place where loved ones could visit, whisper secrets, or deliver vague warnings in the form of symbolic oranges. One popular belief held that sleeping in a certain direction, feet facing east, would make your dreams more receptive, whatever that means. Even Queen Victoria herself is rumored to have kept track of particularly vivid dreams, although historians are still debating which entries were hers and which were palace gossip. Regardless, the royal endorsement didn't hurt the popularity of dream journals. But let's get practical. You settle back into the pillows, blanket up to your chin. Now you're wondering, did all this dream fuss actually help anyone fall asleep? Surprisingly, yes, because for many Victorians, the act of writing down what happened after they slept became a calming ritual before they slept. It was closure. A sense of order in a world where diseases struck without warning and gaslight sometimes exploded. You couldn't control your life, but you could chart your subconscious. It's like keeping a weather log for your soul. You might write, dreamt I was flying, woke up happy, and that became the anchor for your next night. Maybe I'll fly again. And just like that, your mind began to drift. It's worth noting that science now links journaling with better sleep. Not because you solve anything, but because you unload the emotional backpack before trying to rest. But back then, they didn't need peer-reviewed studies. They had their own logic. Dreams are letters from the body, one Victorian naturalist wrote, but in a language we've forgotten. Poetic, right? But also a little frustrating, like getting a letter from your dog, written in Morse code. And so, night after night, people lit a candle, opened their books, and scribbled, dreamt of rain, fell from a tower, walked through glass uncut. The handwriting often shaky, the ink blotched, but the intention clear. Remember, record, reflect. Even if they didn't understand it all, the act was soothing. So now, in this moment, still nestled in a dream that isn't yours, you think about your own thoughts, swirling in the background. What would your dream journal say? Heard a podcast. Time bent around me. Slept well. Seems like a good entry to me. You're still in bed, but the setting subtly changes. The drapes feel heavier. The lamp glows with a faint hiss, and your pillow seems to have grown 3 times its normal size. Welcome to a Victorian bedroom outfitted not just for sleeping, but for monitoring your nocturnal behavior. Tonight's strange little habit, sleepwatching. Now, this wasn't a job title. No one applied to be a full-time sleepwatcher. But in wealthier homes, especially in cities like London or Bath, it wasn't unheard of for maids, nannies, or family members to quietly observe the sleep habits of others, especially children, invalids, or nervous mothers. Not in a creepy way. Okay, maybe a little creepy. But mostly in the name of health. You see, Victorians were obsessed with sleep postures. On your back? Dangerous. Too passive. On your stomach? Indecent. Sideways with one hand above your head? Acceptable, unless you snored. They worried about airflow, blanket weight, mattress firmness, and yes, whether you drooled. And if someone had night terrors or sleepwalked or mumbled strange things into the dark, that's when the watcher took notes. Sometimes even sketching the sleeper's body position or recording how many times they turned over. There were guides written on this. Take Dr. William Hammond's 1879 book, Sleep and Its Derangements. He argued that sleep should be studied like any illness, that the sleeper's behaviors, mouth position, eye flicker, even toenail twitching, could signal deeper issues like brain fatigue, bad moral character, or repressed guilt. Yes, really. One woman reportedly hired a governess whose main job was to sit in the hallway outside her bedroom door and listen for signs of restlessness of spirit. That governess lasted a week. But this wasn't limited to the wealthy. In more modest households, particularly in rural areas, families often shared a bed, or at least a room. That meant your mother-in-law might notice you grinding your teeth or whispering secrets in your sleep. And trust me, they remembered. Children were especially scrutinized. A boy, tossing and turning too much, was at risk of becoming nervously unfit. Girls who muttered in their dreams. Potential signs of romantic overexcitement. Some were given lavender-soaked pillows. Others were simply woken up and told to stop dreaming such nonsense. And when this didn't work, Victorians turned to sleep manuals. One particularly detailed manual from 1883 advised parents to record their children's sleep posture every night for a month. It came with a chart, like a bingo card for weird behaviors. Clenched fists, mouth open, mumbling Latin. Why Latin? No one knows. Probably the school system. This brings us to the scientific sleep diaries of the time, precursors to modern sleep studies. Some amateur scientists documented their own sleep habits with alarming dedication. One gentleman in Oxford reportedly noted the number of breaths per minute he took while sleeping, using a mirror and a clock. Another used soot and string to measure how often he turned over. The string would break if he rolled. This method, by the way, was incredibly unreliable and also got soot everywhere. But these efforts weren't in vain. Victorian sleepwatching, however strange, did lay the groundwork for our modern understanding of REM cycles, sleep paralysis, and insomnia. Though they didn't know it at the time, they were data collectors with feather pens. And speaking of insomnia, guess what one popular cure was? Not herbs, not warm milk, but watching someone else sleep. The theory went, by quietly observing another's peaceful breathing, your own nervous system would mirror theirs and slow down, like a yawn chain reaction. So there you are, in this dimly lit Victorian room, listening to someone else's soft snores, wrapped in layers of wool, and the scent of last week's potpourri. You realize maybe they were onto something. Maybe sleep is contagious after all. Now let your own breathing slow. No one's watching, I promise. Except, well, me. But I'm just telling your story. You're still lying there, wrapped in the imagined warmth of your Victorian blanket, but something in the room shifts. The scent has changed. Is that vinegar? Yes, vinegar. Because tonight you're about to discover one of the more questionable Victorian obsessions, smells that could fix your sleep or ruin it entirely. If you lived in the 1800s and had trouble sleeping, you might not reach for a cup of chamomile tea. No, you'd probably open a drawer filled with an odd collection of bottles, herbs, roots, and, let's be honest, some stuff that would get flagged by modern customs. A favorite? Lavender, of course. Victorians adored it. Dried lavender was sewn into pillows, poured into hot baths, tucked into linen drawers. It was gentle, floral, and, they believed, a sedative for the soul. But here's the twist. Right next to your little lavender sat a raw onion. Yes, a raw onion. Some Victorians believed placing half an onion beside your bed or under it would draw out the day's bad air. This came from the miasma theory, the idea that illness and sleeplessness came from bad smells in the air. Onions, they thought, could soak that up like a sponge. One doctor even recommended placing slices of onion on the soles of your feet while you slept, wrapped in flannel. Did it work? Well, no, but it definitely kept people away, which might have helped reduce noise. Another unexpected sleep perfume? Vinegar and brown paper. Some sleep guides suggested soaking a cloth in vinegar, then laying it across your forehead. The shock of the cold dampness supposedly triggered a sleepy reaction, or a headache. Historians are still debating that one. Then there was camphor. Now, camphor is a strong-smelling substance derived from certain trees, and Victorians used it liberally, dabbing it on handkerchiefs, stuffing it into cushions, even placing it in small dishes near the bed. Supposedly, it soothed the nerves. Unfortunately, modern science later found out that inhaling too much camphor can cause dizziness and nausea. So if you're imagining a long, peaceful night's rest surrounded by camphor and onions, maybe reconsider. And then came the weirder blends. Some upper-class households created personalized dream sachets, little fabric bags filled with their favorite mix of dried herbs, lavender, rose petals, hops, mint, chamomile, and sometimes things like dried orange peel, wormwood, or even shavings from a church pew. Holy dreams, I guess. And don't forget the idea of purifying the room with smoke. You might have lit a stick of benzoin resin, an early incense, or simply thrown dried rosemary on the fire. The scent was supposed to calm your mind, but mostly it made everything smell like a salad dressing factory caught fire. But the goal wasn't always to induce sleep. Some scents were meant to prevent bad dreams. A piece of folklore from northern England claimed that smelling rosemary before bed would keep the devil out of your dreams. Another source recommended thyme under your pillow to ward off nightmares. And let's not forget the more dramatic approach. If you had persistent night terrors, some healers suggested burning hair, your own or that of a troublesome relative. Please do not try this at home. As always, the academic world has not agreed on whether these rituals had any measurable effect. Some say the placebo effect was strong. Others point out that the sheer routine of preparing these sachets and smokes probably created a calming bedtime ritual in itself. And honestly, that might have been the point, because even if onions didn't soak up bad air, and rosemary didn't chase off demons, The act of preparing your sleep space, of arranging scents and textures just right, may have helped Victorian sleepers wind down after chaotic days. So maybe tonight, try your own modern version. Light a soft candle, spritz a little pillow mist, skip the onions, and let your mind float away on a cloud of questionable but comforting bedtime traditions. As the night deepens around you and the candlelight flickers low, you shift ever so slightly in your warm Victorian sheets, careful not to disturb the onion under the bed, of course, and your mind drifts toward one of the more peculiar elements of 19th century slumber, sounds. Because here's something we often forget, long before white noise machines and lo-fi sleep playlists, Victorians had their own methods of crafting a soundscape for rest. And while they didn't have a Spotify playlist titled Sleepy Cobblestone Nights, they did know the value of a little nighttime noise. So let's talk about Victorian sleep sounds, both the deliberate and the unavoidable. First off, if you were lucky or unlucky enough to live in the city, the streets didn't exactly go quiet at 9 p.m. Horse hooves, newspaper boys shouting, bells clanging for one reason or another, not to mention the occasional street fiddler belting out a tune nobody asked for. Think of it as the 1800s version of a car alarm outside your window. For many, these were just part of the nightly rhythm. In fact, city dwellers were often better sleepers because of this background hum. The real problem was silence. Rural areas were too quiet, uncomfortably quiet, and silence, in the absence of distraction, made room for anxiety. Enter the tick, tick, tick of the mechanical clock. In a Victorian bedroom, this wasn't just a timepiece, it was your nighttime companion. Some even placed small wind-up clocks on their pillows, letting the rhythmic ticking lull them to sleep. Admittedly, this might drive some modern listeners bonkers. Then there were those who turned to bedtime readings, not unlike what you're doing now, except theirs were read aloud, by candlelight, and often by someone who wasn't particularly good at voices. You'd sit by the hearth while someone recited from a worn book of moral tales, or better yet, one of the wildly popular penny dreadfuls. If you weren't asleep by chapter 3, odds are you were stuck awake trying to figure out how many people had just been dramatically poisoned. Still, some people took bedtime audio further. Certain health experts of the time, yes, there were sleep experts even back then, recommended that patients with nervous agitation listen to low murmuring voices or gentle droning recitations. It wasn't uncommon for nurses or companions to read the Bible, medical manuals, which were very dry, or agricultural almanacs aloud until their patient drifted off. Imagine falling asleep to someone calmly reciting the projected barley yield for Lincolnshire. Of course, not everyone had a willing narrator, so some turned to music boxes. These small, wind-up devices played simple tunes, sometimes just 30 seconds long, but they were soothing, mechanical, and oddly hypnotic. Some were built into pillow frames, others sat on bedside tables, playing melodies like Greensleeves or Home Sweet Home, notes echoing into the night with the soft whir of gears underneath. One particularly unusual Victorian contraption even combined music and scent. It was a mechanical box that released lavender oil vapors in time with a plucked lullaby. Highly expensive, totally impractical, and completely on brand for Victorian gadgetry. Still, not all sounds were welcome. Consider the coal fire in the corner. Yes, it warmed the room, but it also cracked, hissed, and occasionally popped in alarming ways. There's at least one account of a family in Brighton thinking the devil had entered their room because of a midnight coal spark. The chimney sweep later confirmed it was just a particularly angry ember. Meanwhile, the countryside had its own soundscape. Owls, foxes, wind against the panes, and in some regions, the eerie tolling of distant church bells that rang out every hour. Some villages even had a night bellman who walked the streets ringing a bell to prove he was on duty, which honestly seems like a great way to keep people awake. Still, Victorians believed in embracing their surroundings. Let the night speak to you, one 1870s pamphlet advised, for the whisper of the dark is better than the rattle of your mind. Historians remain divided on whether Victorian sleep was truly restful. Some suggest people woke multiple times a night, while others argue their segmented sleep might have been healthier. What they agree on, though, is that environment mattered, whether through soft ticking, distant fiddles, or the comforting drone of a barley forecast, sound was part of the ritual. So tonight, if your room feels too quiet, imagine a gentle tick of a clock beside you, or perhaps a faint lullaby from a far-off music box. And if you hear a coal spark, just smile. It's not the devil, probably. You stretch out just a little more under your quilt. Don't worry, no judgment. And somewhere in the folds of your sleep-fogged thoughts, a question floats to the surface. What did Victorians wear to bed? You'd think the answer would be simple. Nightgowns, maybe. But oh no. The truth is more layered, literally and metaphorically, because in the Victorian era, even sleepwear had rules. Fashion didn't stop at the bedroom door. It just became frillier, fussier, and sometimes more flammable. Let's start with you. Yes, you. You've just washed your face, with rose water perhaps, extinguished most of the lamps, and it's time to change into something more drowsy. But this isn't a modern t-shirt and sweats kind of situation. If you're a Victorian lady, your bedtime ensemble probably includes a floor-length cotton or flannel nightgown with a high ruffled collar, because neck modesty matters, even in your dreams, long sleeves with lace cuffs, delicately itchy, and sometimes a night jacket, basically a bedtime version of a blazer, adorable, but not particularly breathable. Some wealthier women even had embroidered monograms on their gowns, in case anyone forgot whose dreams they were trespassing in. For added coziness, there might be bed socks, a lace-trimmed sleeping cap, and in winter, perhaps even bed drawers. Yes, underpants specifically for sleeping. Imagine waking up tangled in 3 layers of fabric while trying to reach a chamber pot in the dark. That's peak 19th century sleep culture. Now, if you're a gentleman, you've got your own set of bedtime armor. Picture a striped nightshirt, usually down to the knees, and a matching sleep cap that looks suspiciously like a tiny wizard hat. There's a good chance you're also wearing a dressing gown. Basically, a Victorian bathrobe, which might be quilted, velvet, paisley, or all 3 at once, if you're feeling extra regal, and yes, bedroom slippers, because God forbid your feet touch the actual floor. But what if you weren't wealthy? Let's zoom out of the upper-class boudoirs and peek inside a working-class cottage. Here, bedtime clothing is functional. Worn-out day shirts double as nightwear. Children might sleep in whatever they didn't spill porridge on that evening. One shirt might be used for sleeping, chores, and going to town, with a quick rinse in between, if you're lucky. Privacy wasn't exactly a thing either. Whole families often slept in the same room, sometimes the same bed. So the bedtime fashion show was less about ruffles and more about not freezing. Here's a fun side note. There were actual fashion debates in Victorian magazines about whether women should match their nightgowns to their bedding. Yes, really. If you've ever coordinated your pajamas with your blanket for the aesthetic, congratulations. You're part of a proud tradition of nighttime fabulousness. Now, let's not forget sleeping caps. They weren't just about looking like Ebenezer Scrooge. For women, caps protected intricately pinned hairstyles, because redoing that in the morning was a whole other ordeal. For men, caps kept heads warm in drafty rooms. However, historians still debate how frequently ordinary people wore them. There are records, but also satirical cartoons poking fun at them. So we may never know if they were mainstream or just an upper-class quirk. And then there's perfumed sleepwear. Yes, some wealthy Victorians, especially in France and parts of London, would lightly scent their nightclothes with lavender, orange blossom, or even violet water. To improve dreams, they said. Whether it worked? Science is silent, but you can't deny the commitment to the bedtime vibe. So if you're feeling underdressed right now in your crumpled old t-shirt, just remember, your 19th century counterpart was probably choking in flannel, tripping on ruffles, and trying to keep a lace cap from sliding over their eyes. And they still couldn't sleep. The clock ticked softly in the corner. Well, if this were the 1800s, it might be a wind-up clock, ominously loud in the silence of the night. And as you burrow deeper under the covers, you realize something odd. Your feet are freezing. Now, imagine you're a Victorian. There's no central heating, no electric blanket, and the frost is literally forming on the inside of your windows. What do? Well, you reach for your bed warmer. This chapter is all about the devices and hacks Victorians used to warm up their icy beds before drifting into sleep. Because when it came to bedtime temperatures, the stakes were high, and the toes were cold. Let's start with the most iconic, the brass bed warmer. It's a metal pan with a long wooden handle, like a pizza peel's weird cousin. You'd fill it with hot coals from the fireplace, slide it between the bed sheets, and slowly wave it around like a gentle, under-the-cover flamethrower. Did it work? Yes, sometimes too well. Many bed sheets were linen soaked in starch and paired with open flames. Well, let's just say spontaneous sheet combustion was a real fear. Some bed warmers even had warning labels engraved on them. "Do not linger," they'd caution. Imagine reading that right before bed. But that wasn't the only method. Some households used heated soapstones, flat, smooth stones warmed in the hearth and then wrapped in cloth to prevent burns. You'd tuck them at the foot of the bed, and voila, a Victorian foot spa, kind of. These stones could stay warm for hours, and, unlike coals, they didn't threaten to set your entire mattress ablaze. A win-win, really. And then came the humble predecessor to your favorite modern invention, the hot water bottle. Originally made of ceramic or glass, these were filled with boiling water, sealed with a cork or screw top, and swaddled in cloth. They were affectionately called bed pigs in some regions. Why? No one really knows. But try whispering, "Come to bed, little bed pig," sometime, and see if you don't feel oddly soothed. Later versions used rubber, which was more flexible, but also more prone to bursting at the worst possible time. There's at least one diary from the 1890s that records, in perfect deadpan, water bottle failure, sheets thoroughly dampened, unpleasant. Still, these items were coveted. In poorer households, there might only be one bed warmer, and everyone took turns with it. First the baby, then grandma, then the rest of the family in birth order. You learn to sleep fast or sleep cold. Oh, and before you get too cozy thinking about bedtime warmth, let's talk windows. Victorians were obsessed with ventilation. Many believed stale air caused diseases like tuberculosis. So even in the dead of winter, some people kept a window cracked open overnight. Yes, willingly. A doctor might advise, fresh air is curative, and out went your cozy dreams. In came the breeze. So what do? You wrap yourself in layer after layer of bedding, quilts, eiderdowns and blankets so heavy you couldn't move if you wanted to. Being pinned under the weight wasn't a bug, it was a feature. Victorians knew all about weighted blanket therapy, even if they didn't call it that. And for children? Some slept with heated bricks wrapped in flannel. Others were tucked in so tightly they could barely roll over. Comfort wasn't always the priority. Not dying of the cold was. There's even evidence that some people, especially in country homes, would sleep in their day clothes, or at least keep layers on, socks, waistcoats, even shawls. You might wake up sweating or shivering, depending on how well your coal stove kept burning through the night. Interestingly, historians still debate just how common these warming tools were. Some say bed warmers were mostly for the rich, while others argue they were standard middle-class gear. As with many things in the Victorian world, there's no single answer, just lots of variations and some wonderfully peculiar family traditions. So tonight, as you adjust your thermostat or reach for a modern electric blanket, spare a thought for the people who went to bed armed with rocks, metal pans, and the blind hope that nothing would catch fire. Honestly, if you made it through a Victorian winter night, you deserved your dreams. You shift in bed, letting the weight of your imaginary Victorian blanket settle over you like a polite elephant, and wonder, what if you couldn't sleep? Not because of noise, cold, or stress, but because your doctor told you not to. Yes, in some corners of the 19th century, insomnia wasn't always treated as something to fix. It was, at times, something to cultivate. Tonight, we're stepping into the curious and often contradictory world of Victorian sleep theories and medical advice, where doctors prescribed lavender baths one day and mustard foot rubs the next. Let's start with a strange but telling idea: segmented sleep. Some Victorian thinkers, especially those inspired by earlier pre-industrial patterns, believed that the ideal sleep was actually broken into two chunks. You'd go to bed at, say, 9 p.m., wake up around 1 or 2 a.m. for a few hours of quiet reflection, letter writing, or even mild exercise, and then fall back asleep until morning. Sound disruptive? Not to them. In fact, those twilight hours were considered the most spiritually productive, great for reading the Bible, praying, or catching up on personal journaling. Think of it as a very sleepy productivity hack. Of course, not everyone was on board with this two-part napathon. Some doctors insisted uninterrupted sleep was vital and prescribed all kinds of natural cures to help you drift off. And here's where things get fragrant. Let's talk about aromatherapy, Victorian style. Lavender was queen. You'd find it stuffed in sachets, sprinkled on pillows, and even brewed into tea. It was thought to calm the nerves, slow the pulse, and send the mind into a dreamy haze. Some even called it sleep's perfume. That part, honestly, still holds up. But then came the stranger ones. Have you ever tried to sleep next to a roasted onion? Victorian advice columns occasionally recommended placing a sliced onion near the bed, not to eat, just to sniff. Why? Well, it was believed the pungent aroma could open nasal passages and balance the humors, which was basically a fancy way of saying maybe it knocks you out. There were also recommendations for rosemary vinegar foot baths, hot milk with nutmeg, and even wrapping one's head in cabbage leaves soaked in gin. Yes, gin, for soothing the temples. In upper-class households, if you still couldn't sleep, you might call in the big guns, a physician who specialized in nervous complaints. These gentlemen, always gentlemen, might prescribe rest cures, which could include no talking for several days, no reading or writing, being spoon-fed by a nurse in total silence. Honestly, it sounds more like a punishment for a Greek tragedy than a treatment plan. Still, Some Victorians swore by it. Meanwhile, in less wealthy homes, people had their own remedies passed down through generations. Grandma might tell you to sleep with a silver coin under your pillow, or burn dried chamomile stems in the fireplace before bed, or she might simply shrug and say, "Try counting chimney bricks." Even children weren't spared. A fussy toddler might be dabbed with soothing syrups, some of which were later found to contain alcohol, opium, or morphine. Yep. Victorian parenting was a wild time. Of course, not all advice was mystical or medicinal. Some authors emphasized sleep hygiene, though they didn't call it that. They talked about keeping a clean bedroom, avoiding excitement before bed, and limiting the use of gas lamps late at night. You might think these Victorians were silly, but in many ways they were onto something. They understood that sleep wasn't just biological. It was emotional, spiritual, and cultural, even if they occasionally prescribed pickled cabbage bandanas. And to this day, historians still argue about how common these practices were. Some believe the odd remedies were outliers published in quirky magazines. Others suggest they were widespread, especially in households that couldn't afford professional doctors. So next time you find yourself lying awake, debating whether to reach for melatonin or scroll your phone, remember, there was once a time when your best option might have been a hot onion, a foot soak, and a prayer. And weirdly enough, some people swore it worked. You roll onto your side, eyes closed, but mind drifting. And imagine yourself not in bed, but at a dinner party in 1885, somewhere in the heart of London. Candles flicker, cutlery clinks, and you overhear someone whisper, "She's gone mad from too much sewing after midnight." Sounds ridiculous? Well, Victorians were deeply suspicious of what they called nervous energy. And if you were a woman, that energy could be blamed for just about anything, including your trouble sleeping. Tonight, we're stepping into the delicate, laced-up world of Victorian sleep and gender roles, where insomnia was rarely just a bad night. It was often a symptom of something scandalous, medical, or moral. Let's start with this. If you were a woman suffering from chronic insomnia, the prevailing belief was that your nerves were overtaxed, but not from hard labor, like working in a coal mine. Oh no, you were simply thinking too much. Doctors warned against overindulgence in reading, especially novels, writing letters, and, heaven forbid, intellectual pursuits. These were said to overstimulate the female brain, disrupting her natural, restful nature. Some physicians argued that women's minds were wired for sleep, and if they couldn't rest, it meant they were veering off nature's track. A few even suggested that ambition itself was dangerous, especially if it came with late-night thinking. So, the prescription? Rest. Endless rest. Enter the infamous rest cure, particularly associated with American physician Silas Weir Mitchell. This involved confinement to bed for weeks or even months, no reading, no visitors, no physical movement, diet consisting mostly of milk, raw eggs, and porridge, massage and electrotherapy to stimulate unused muscles. It was prescribed disproportionately to women, especially artists and writers, like Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who famously wrote The Yellow Wallpaper as a response to her experience with the treatment. If you were a man, however, insomnia was considered a sign of overwork or vigorous mental engagement. Think of it as the Victorian version of burnout. Male sleeplessness was sometimes even seen as noble, a result of heavy responsibilities, scientific thinking, or national importance. The cures were different too. A man might be encouraged to go on a seaside holiday, take up fishing, or even indulge in brandy before bed. Because, of course, brandy fixes everything. It gets better, or worse, depending on your sarcasm levels. Victorian society also believed that sleepwalking, yes, sleepwalking, was more common in women, and sometimes interpreted as a sign of hysteria, repressed desire, or spiritual vulnerability. There are newspaper clippings from the 1860s reporting women who wandered rooftops in their nightgowns, allegedly in trance-like states. Some claimed they were visited by angels. Others were said to be haunted by lunar influence. Historians today are understandably skeptical. Still, in a time when Freud hadn't quite emerged yet, sleep was already tangled up in questions of morality, gender, and propriety. And especially for women, not sleeping enough was never just a medical concern. It was a social one. Couldn't sleep? Maybe you were secretly unhappy in your marriage. Maybe your womb was wandering. Maybe your soul was restless. Or maybe, just maybe, you were a human being with a body and brain that didn't always play nice with bedtime. Modern scholars debate how widespread these beliefs were, especially outside of medical journals and fashionable London salons. Some suggest rural women followed more practical traditions: herbal teas, warm baths, whispering to the cat. Others may have simply coped. What we do know is that the language used to describe sleep disorders often mirrored the language of control over time, over space, over people's bodies, especially women's. So next time someone tells you to just calm down and get some rest, remember, that advice once came with a side of isolation, raw eggs, and 19th century sexism. Sleep wasn't always just a state of being. In Victorian times, it was a reflection of who you were allowed to be. You're lying there now, wrapped in your blanket like a human croissant, and the world outside your window has gone quiet. But back in Victorian England, even the silence could be loud, especially if you lived near a railway station. In our final chapter tonight, let's take a gentle stroll through something surprisingly modern-sounding: the first attempts at soundproofing and managing nighttime noise pollution. You see, the 19th century brought with it unprecedented technological noise: steam engines, streetcars, gas lamps that hissed when lit, and the ever-present clatter of horse hooves and carriage wheels over cobblestone streets. All these sounds shaped the new urban experience. And for people who were used to the relative hush of pre-industrial evenings, suddenly being jolted awake at 3 a.m. by a delivery wagon or a clanging fire bell was not ideal. Some upper-class Victorians had the means to do something about it. Enter the birth of domestic sleep architecture. Yes, that's a real phrase. Bedrooms in wealthier homes were often designed at the back of the house, away from the street. Curtains grew heavier, not just for privacy, but to muffle noise. And doorways were sealed with thick tapestries or draft blockers that also helped block sound. Some people even hung acoustic portraits on the walls, paintings mounted on thick, sound-absorbing velvet. Yes, a little visual art and noise cancellation in one. For the working classes, though, the options were limited. If you lived in a boarding house above a pub, your lullaby was probably the sound of someone throwing up into a barrel. In these cases, people developed more personal strategies: stuffing ears with wax, sleeping in shifts, or, yes, using onion slices as a scent-based form of white noise. It's a stretch, but they tried. Then there were the factories. Imagine trying to nap in a city where the iron foundry ran through the night, or the bakery ovens fired up at 4 a.m. It's no wonder that doctors started writing about urban insomnia by the 1880s. This wasn't just about sound either. It was also about light. Gas lamps lit the streets, and people were suddenly exposed to light deep into the night. a radical shift from the candlelit rhythms of earlier centuries. Some even blamed insomnia on unwholesome modern illumination. That's when you start to see a new market emerge: Victorian sleep aids. Window shutters with extra padding sleep caps soaked in lavender water. Soft ticking clocks marketed as restful companions. And yes, pillows infused with herbs like hops, chamomile, and valerian root. Even the burgeoning world of consumer advertising got involved. One 1884 ad promised, "Our new feather bed is so silent your worries won't dare to speak." Of course, historians now know that sleep patterns in the 19th century weren't identical to ours. Many people slept in two distinct phases: first sleep and second sleep, with a period of quiet waking in between. It was during that twilight wakefulness that people prayed, wrote letters, or just sat and thought. So maybe the noise wasn't always the villain. Maybe, for some, sleeplessness was just another part of life, natural, expected, and sometimes even embraced. But that didn't stop Victorians from trying to fix it, because at their core, they were people just like you, lying in bed at night, wishing their brain would quiet down, wondering what might help them drift off faster. They didn't have noise-canceling headphones, or melatonin, or cozy YouTube channels whispering odd little stories to them, but they had onions, and lavender, and a fierce belief that sleep, no matter how elusive, was worth chasing with velvet curtains and valerian-soaked handkerchiefs. So next time your neighbor's dog is barking or your ceiling creaks like it's auditioning for a horror film, just smile and remember, people have been battling nighttime noise for over 100 years. You're in good company. So here you are now. The lavender's done its part. The onion slice, well, maybe not. But your mind? It's quieter, slower, like a gentle tide pulling back from the shore. You've traveled through gas-lit streets, tiptoed across creaky floorboards, and peeked into the bedrooms of people long gone, people who, just like you, tried everything from warm milk to stuffed velvet curtains, hoping for that perfect night's rest. And even if the methods were odd, or the science a little shaky, their wish was the same as yours, just to drift off, safe and sound. So let go of the ticking clock. Let the night wrap around you like a soft wool blanket from 1883. No need to worry about train whistles or fire bells or distant carriages now. It's just you and sleep and the comforting hum of a story well told. Rest easy, my friend. You've earned it.